Hi, my name is Mary Campbell, and this is my article review and presentation as a graduate student in Reading 5337 for the summer of 2020. I chose to read the article entitled "To Wait in Tier 1 or Intervene Immediately, a randomized experiment examining first grade response to intervention in reading." Before I get started talking about this study, it's important to think, what is RTI, or the response to intervention? RTI is a system of support to support a learner who is not making adequate yearly progress or is performing significantly below grade level in math or reading. Tier 1 is your core classroom instruction. Tier 2 is targeted small group, and Tier 3 is an intensive individual intervention. And now a brief introduction to the article. Findings from the authors indicated that using a rapid response to students' literacy needs supports students to achieve higher reading outcomes compared to the traditional or typical RTI model that requires students to begin at Tier 1. This year-long study of 522 first graders measured the efficacy of using a dynamic RTI model compared to the traditional RTI model. Using random assignment within the 34 classrooms across 7 schools in the Southeast, researchers investigated the 2 approaches to intervention. Participants were assessed using 5 assessments for their initial placement into the 3 tiers based on their reading needs. In the typical RTI model, participants begin in Tier 1, and then after 8 weeks could be moved into Tier 2 as needed. Once in Tier 2 or Tier 3, students received reading support that targeted decoding and making meaning instruction. Over the course of the year, students in both the dynamic and typical RTI model could be moved flexibly based on their progress at their current tier. The authors' findings from the study indicated that the dynamic RTI model was successful at improving participants' reading outcomes significantly between fall and spring. Also, having a model for intervention that is flexible and more immediate supports students to have their needs met sooner, rather than the typical waiting to fail model. Critique of this article. I agree with the author's findings because prior to reading this study, I would also hypothesize that using a dynamic intervention that is more responsive to students' needs would be better than the current wait-to-fail model. What I liked most about this study is its possibilities for implications for schools and districts to better meet the needs of students struggling. The strengths of this article are that the research team did an excellent job throughout the study to ensure fidelity of the interventions and instruction by videotaping the interventions and Tier 1 instruction in the classroom. They also did an excellent job with random assignment to treatment compared to the control in all of the classrooms to control for differences between teachers and classrooms. The weaknesses of this study include that the research team was not blind to who received the treatment, and the participants were only first graders. My only dislike of this study is that it did not include a large English learner population. I would be interested to see if the findings could be generalized or replicated with a more diverse population. And now, the application of the article's findings, or why is this important? The following slides are a few things that I feel like are the important findings based on this article and related to our class's reading. One key area is to progress monitor frequently based on your students, meaning if you know that they're lower, you need to progress monitor more frequently. Whereas if they're higher, you don't need to progress monitor as much. Building on the last slide is to always know your students. What are their strengths, areas for growth, and goals in reading? You should be able to easily say what each of your students is working on based on their reading levels. Another key area is to understand where and how English learners fit into the RTI model. Just because an English learner is learning English doesn't mean that they can't benefit from an RTI model or an RTI approach. Supporting an English learner is best when you know where they are and how to support them. Another key takeaway from this article is to know and learn more about the RTI process. When and how is it used? Why is it important? The image on the right shows a breakdown of the RTI process. It's important to understand how these tiers relate to one another and why this process is important. The typical RTI model is a tiered process to support students where they are. At Tier 1, this includes 80% of students in the school who are typically responding to a good core curriculum. Tier 2 is 15% of the student population, and it's students who are at risk for academic failure. This includes small group and supplemental instruction. Tier 3 refers to the most intensive level of support. This is usually for 5% of the student population, and it's only for students who do not respond to interventions at Tier 1 or Tier 2. It requires an intensive level of support, usually one-on-one with the student, for about 15 to 20 minutes every day, or for a longer amount of time for less days. It is important to note that all students begin at Tier 1 in the typical model. Then they can be moved to Tier 2 for approximately 6 to 8 weeks, and then into Tier 3 after not meeting adequate goals at Tier 2. The RTI process is usually done as a team with the classroom teacher, administrators, the parents, and additional support staff. At the end of the Tier 3 process, meaning after 6 to 8 weeks at Tier 1 of not being successful, another 6 to 8 weeks at Tier 2 not being successful, and an additional 6 to 8 weeks at Tier 3 of not being successful, students may be discussed with the committee to determine if they're eligible for special education. To learn more about the RTI process, you will want to ask people in your school and district how RTI model works in your area. Schools and districts differ in how they approach the RTI model, so it's important to understand how it works at your school and or district. To learn more about the RTI model at your school, you will want to ask some key questions to school personnel. Some of those questions include: what assessments do you use to measure a child's reading? What intervention materials are available for me to use? What is the current timeline between Tier 1, 2, and 3 in our district? And who can support me if I am having a hard time implementing interventions? Thank you for tuning in to my article, critique, and review. I hope you enjoyed it. And that's all for now. Say goodnight.